Innovate. Accelerate. Move technology forward. The startup revolution is now.
Are we live? Are we live? Oh, hello everyone. A pleasant good afternoon and thank you for taking the time to join me in this session about project management for startups. Now, what's the second most important factor in a successful startup? I guess you really wouldn't know because a lot of the events we attend to are talking about ideation, customer validation, or revenue generation. But nobody, or if there's any, that actually talks about execution. When in fact, 8 out of the 12 reasons that startups fail can actually be solved by proper project execution. So if you look at the studies about why startups fail, we can see that some of the reasons would be running out of cash, would be getting outcompeted, not good product, unable to compete in terms of pricing, the team's not working very well, and they probably pivot and change their ideas. A lot of this can actually be solved with proper execution of the solution. That's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Hi, I'm Allan, founder and startup mentor. In this session, I'm gonna share with you some of the best practices and practical tips about project execution, specifically about project management for startups. I have been in the software development industry for the last 20 years. In 2007, I formed a company called IdeaTech where we service clients here and abroad, developing different types of application from small utility apps to large enterprise government projects. I've also been involved in several startups and formed some myself, failed most of them, but a couple of them are still working until now. I'm also a co-director of the Founder Institute Philippines, where we teach different startups how to establish new companies, and from ideation all the way to incorporation to legal and fundraising. So for the last 7 years, we've been consistently producing new companies, about 6 or 7 of them every year. And we've seen some of them grow to become real successful startups. I'm also a board director of the Philippine Software Industry Association. And for this afternoon, I'll be happy to share with you all my experiences about project management so that hopefully you don't have to undergo the same problems and the same challenges I've faced. Now, why project management for startups? Well, primarily because even if you are a startup, you need certain processes, certain discipline in place in order to have a predictable result. It will be very hard for you to deliver a certain software without predictability. No? You're gonna define a certain set of features and you're gonna say, hey, I need this tomorrow. Hey, I need this next week. Without any basis as to how long will actually take to finish a certain work. Right? So it's important that you put proper processes to be able to estimate the work, to be able to know the skills of your people, and come up with a plan that's actually realistic that you can execute. Okay, with proper planning, with proper execution, you'll be able to get a predictable project timeline. And with a predictable project timeline, you'll be able to coordinate the task of all your startups. Of all the departments in your startup. From the marketing, to the sales process, to your investor pitching. All of this will have proper basis. And you have the confidence that you will actually be able to deliver it. Now, that starts with proper project management. Now, a lot of startups will say, hey, we don't need project management because we are agile. Okay, agile still needs project management. It's not a replacement. All right? I've seen startups embracing agile without fully understanding project management. And in the end, they still fail. In the end, they keep on promising timelines that they are not able to deliver. No, they will say something can be delivered within 2 months. 6 months has passed, and they're still halfway done with what they've originally committed, because there was no proper project management. And they say, "Oh, we're agile. We're just doing everything as we want to." Now, sometimes there are certain myths about agile that are misconstrued. And that's why it's very important that I'm sharing the concepts of project management as you practice agile and you go on. So another myth is that agile is the modern way and project management is old. No, again, that's not true. Project management may be old, but it's never gonna be obsolete. The concepts of project management will hold regardless of whether there's a new methodology, there's a new process about agile. The basic concept will remain true. So it's important that you understand project management. And then some would say, "Hey, Allan, we don't need a project manager because we're agile." Well, guess what? The concept of project management is not a job for project manager. It's a job for everyone in the project team. Everyone, from the most senior developer to the most junior tester, designer. These very basic concepts about project management would help them to properly manage their time, their deliverable, their scope, and be able to identify as a group how to commit and how to make sure that their teams are able to deliver to what has been promised, or to what they promised, to what they committed to. Okay? And some would say, agile is time box, so if I'm not able to finish a certain task, it's okay. I can move on to the next time box. Again, that's another misconception. In fact, that's very prone to abuse. I've seen that several times where projects, just keep on moving, adjusting timelines, primarily because, hey, we're time box anyway. If I don't finish this, I'm just gonna move this to the next sprint. That's not true. You need proper estimation, you need proper commitments, and you need everyone to deliver to their commitments. If they are not able to deliver to their commitments, they should be able to understand why and be able to justify, what are the problems that caused to the delay so that they'll be able to address that in the future. And you're gonna say, okay, so Allan, do we need to study the project management body of knowledge? That's a lot. It's gonna take me 10 years to actually study the whole concept. Yeah. Now that's what this talk is all about. No, I'm gonna tell you the essential concepts of project management that are important for startups. Yes, the PM book has a lot of process areas, 9 process areas, if I remember correctly. And you don't actually need all of them when you're developing systems for startups. So we're gonna talk only about a few basic concepts that are important, and that's what I'm gonna share with you in this talk. Alright, so let's get it on. The very first concept that you need to understand is the triple constraint. The triple constraint talks about the trifecta of scope, time, and cost, and how they affect each other. It's important you understand this because sometimes, in fact, not sometimes, most of the time, you are struggling how to manage your time, how to manage your schedule. I'm not able to finish my task. What should I do? No, I am given 4 hours. I think I need 8 hours to accomplish this. What should I do? No, these are very, very, very common questions that you will encounter when you're in a software project. And understanding the triple constraint gives you a tool. It's like a toolbox that you'll be able to use whenever you are facing certain issues about schedule or deliverable or quality for that matter. Now, as you can see from this triple constraint, any change in any factors, in any of the 3 factors will affect the other. No? So for example, you have a scope and the scope changes, right? Additional requirements were given. That's gonna affect either the time or the cost or both. So that's the very first thing that you need to understand. If there's a new requirements that's given, definitely you need more time to accommodate all these new requirements. Or you change cost. That means you need to put additional people to do this so that we're still able to finish the entire thing on time. Or if something needs to get done at half the time, then you either reduce your scope or increase your cost, adding more people so that you shorten the time, or you cut down the scope so that we at least finish the requirements on time, on whatever launch date you have. No? So understanding the triple constraint, very basic concept, but really important when you're handling day-to-day tasks. No, this is very very common, especially when you're working with founders, because a lot of the founders will come up with new ideas. Oh, I heard from client A that we actually need certain features. I want it done tomorrow, right? Without really appreciating the work that you have on your pipeline and how is that gonna affect what you're currently doing. So actually, the concept of triple constraint will actually be very useful also, not only for development team but for the founders, right? If founders or the product owners has concept of the triple constraint, they'll also be able to manage your time, your scope, and your deliverable. Now, the second most important concept that you need to understand is the people, process, and tools. This is a framework that you need to understand when you are doing process improvement, when you got delayed and you want to understand why you're getting delayed, when you are gonna do a research or establish new processes or research on new items, you need to look at people, process, and tools. This framework will help you plan and get a better picture of what happened or what do you need to make things happen, right? So let's just take a quick look about this very quickly. Let's talk about people. So you ask certain questions about people. Do you actually have the skills needed to deliver the project? Does everyone know what the project goals are? Is everyone aligned? No? Do each and everyone know the roles of their team members? If they need certain things, do they know who they're gonna talk to? Right? Who's clearing the roadblocks, and are the issues being resolved promptly? Right? Do the team members help each other out? Do we see volunteerism about people to reach out and help other people? Right? Do people feel safe about voicing their concerns? Now, so these questions will allow you to answer, do I actually have the right team to get this task done? Right. Next, let's talk about process. So process, then we look into, if you're in agile team, you talk about sprint, right? Is the sprint goal clear? Does everyone know what the goals for the sprint? Is there a code review process in place? Are you actually tracking the hours of time spent? Are you able to estimate the task properly? Or are you getting delayed? Right? Now, this may take a bit more time for you, especially for startups to fully implement in their teams. But understanding all these questions, or understanding the answers to these questions, will help you identify what are the areas that you actually need to look into and you need to improve on, right? So if a certain process or if a certain task is not completed on time, do you actually know why? And do you know how many hours is actually spent addressing the why, or that caused the delay, right? So understanding the process will help you get a better picture about what's happening in the project. All right, and then let's look at the tools, right? Do you have proper tracking tools? Do you have proper code repository? Is it easy to deploy your application to the staging server, to the production servers? Do you actually have automated quality checks in terms of the software quality, right? So these are the questions that you actually formulate when you are thinking of the people, process, and tools. So that's useful, again, when you're doing process improvement. Actually, that's also useful when you start building a team, right? So when you've already identified a project that you want to work on, you can look into people, process, and tools. Who are the people I need? What are the processes I need to put in place? And what are the tools I need to actually get this project rolling and complete the project as I've anticipated. Okay? Now, let's move on. Third concept is about the cost of change. Now, a lot of the concepts about agile, lean startup, all of this relies heavily on the concept of the cost of change. The cost of change is saying that the longer the change takes effect, the more expensive it will be. No, so let's say an example. If a requirement if a requirement was changed at the start of the project when you're doing envisioning ideation, right? And you figured out, there's the customer is gonna do certain tasks not as what you've anticipated. The change is just maybe in your pride that you were not able to thought of the idea earlier, right? So it's not very costly. I mean, except kung ma-pride ka. But the idea is that, if the change in the requirement was identified at later stage, for example, when you are already going to deploy, you've already completed the entire thing, and you showed it to your client, and the client said, "No, that's not what I want. This is what I want." But you've already spent, 3 months building the whole darn thing, and now you have to go back and change the whole thing. That's more costly, right? It's gonna be cheaper if you actually develop a prototype and showed it to your client and told them, and the client told you that, okay, this doesn't go there, it goes here. Then you change the prototype and you keep on changing. So that's gonna be cheaper than actually doing the change towards the end. No, it's even gonna be more expensive if the change is done when the thing is already in production and you already say have 100 or 1,000 customers using your system. No, because it's not only gonna change the requirements, the design, the rollout, it's also gonna change the behavior of your end users, right? So understanding the cost of change will allow you to try all possible ways to identify or pinpoint the actual requirements at the start, as early as possible. Again, why? Because the longer it takes for you to apply the change, the more expensive it will be for you and your startup. And that's actually one of the reasons why many startups fail. No? Because they were not able to realize, they were not able to figure out at an earlier stage what the customer wants. What the features do you actually need? How do you actually implement these features? Until it became too late, that you ran out of cash flow already to apply the changes that you have learned. Right? So it's so if you look at it, that's the entire concept of lean startup. Right? That's the entire concept of agile. You want things done as short as possible and show it to your client as early as possible. And that's what lean startup is about. That's what agile is about. No? Both concepts rely on the concept of the cost of change. No? So it's again important for you to understand the concept of cost of change. Now, so far we've talked about three main areas, three main concepts that are important in project management: the triple constraint, the cost of change, and the people process tools framework. All right, now let's move on to more exciting topics. Let's talk about setting up the team. So if you are a founder and you want to start a team, or if you're one of the managers that got hired early and you want to set up a team, what are the areas that you should look into to set up the right team? Now, how do you actually build a successful startup team? So first, you need to understand your why. You need to be able to define your why. When I'm forming the team, I always go back to the concept of Simon Sinek. Start with why. Right? You understand why are you doing certain things, because it will be your driving purpose. You hire people for the cause, not for the money. You hire people because they believe in your concept. They believe how you're gonna change the world. They believe in your solution. They believe in your why. And I have a very personal experience about this. When I started the company way back in 2007, I always tell my people, I start this company because I believe in the Filipino talent. I believe in the Filipino skills, ingenuity. I've seen a lot of my colleagues go out of the country. They work for a Singaporean company, they work for a US company, or an Australian company, and they actually have a all Filipino team delivering the system, and these guys are selling their solution elsewhere, in the US, in the Europe, in Japan, which for me doesn't make sense because we can actually build the system here. That's why I hired people who believe in the Filipino talent. I hired people who are very passionate about their work. And in 2008, when the recession came, I have to tell everyone, guys, I'm very sorry. We'll not be able to give you any salary increases. We have to cut all our extra benefits in terms of company outing, budgets, and events. Because we don't have much project, but we'll be able to survive. And honestly, I was expecting people to start, resigning, and because they wouldn't be happy about what's happening. But surprisingly, they stayed with me. They stayed with me throughout the recession and were able to recover a year after. And I'm very happy of the commitment that they've shown to me. Why? Because I've hired people who believe in my cause. I did not hire them because they want a higher pay. I cannot afford higher pay anyway. But they join me because they believe that there is a cost to what I want to do. And when certain problems come in, it's this cost, it's this why that will actually bring you together. All right, so it's important that you define your why when you are forming your team, so that you'll be able to find people who believe in your cause. All right, so let's move on. Next, set clear goals. Okay, clear goals aligns everyone. It makes sure that everybody knows what the goals are. For the next 3 months, this is what we need to achieve. For the next 6 months, this is what we need to achieve. In the long term, this is our product roadmap. It's important so that everyone gets a better picture, a bigger picture of what the system is going to look. It's going to look like down the road. It gives clarity, and clarity actually empowers people, because if everyone knows the goal, they will be able to think of better ways that you cannot think of, right? If you have the third criteria is to make sure that you define your roles. All right. So now, when you're defining the roles, you focus on the qualities needed, not necessarily on the skills, because skills can be trained. We like in IdeaTech and Mansur Lab now, we have a training program where we'll be able to get fresh graduates or career shifters, and they undergo this training program so that they earn or they learn the necessary skills to get things done, right? So skills can be learned, but the attitude and the qualities of a person is harder to change. That's why you look for people with the right qualities that are needed for the role, right? And then maybe the other thing you need to look into is, of course, diversity. You need to look for people with different types of personalities. Now, when you say diversity, we're not only talking of cultural diversity, it's also personality. In our case, we do the DISC profile assessment, DISC, so that we know who are the team members that can go well together, or who should you form together so that you complete the entire personality traits in a team, right? So you don't want to put all leaders in one team, right? You don't want to put all alpha people together in a team. You need to combine, you need to mix them so that you get better collaboration, you need to get better ideas. Sometimes we even involve our HR, our accountant as part of the development team. Because they bring in new ideas, they bring in new concepts that you haven't really thought of. So that would also help for you to be more diverse. Because it's through diversity where you'll be able to come up with a broader concept or a broader solution that addresses all the problems. So now that you've you've already defined your why and you already have your team, and you start working with a team, understand the Tuckman stage of group development. Now, this concept has been around for more than 50 years. But it still remains true until now. The Tuckman concept talks about the life cycle of a team when they start forming together, right? So it goes through forming, storming, norming, and performing, right? And then, so in summary, basically what it says is that when a team starts to form, you are in forming stage, and everybody's excited. Oh, we're part of a new team. Oh, nice meeting you. And then you try to tell them what your experience is, and you share them all your experience, and everybody's very happy to be working together until you start encountering problems, until you start facing issues until you see changes in the requirements and your colleagues not able to deliver or all these problems. Then you go through the storming. Now, that's very common, no? Because you haven't really worked with each other yet that well. So you don't know the working dynamics of the team. No? So you go through the storming stage and you try to figure out how to actually work with each other. And then once you figure that out, you go through the norming. Everybody already knows what the skills are, their roles are, and what's the motivation of one and the other, and they know how to coordinate, to collaborate with each other. You go through the norming stage. And then once that becomes efficient, hopefully you reach a performing stage so that you'll be able to deliver much better than any other team. Right? And that's a very common cycle of any teams. No? So when you are forming a new team, you have to understand this concept behind your back, behind your mind. You'll be able to understand. Oh yeah, we are in the storming stage. So let's just go through this, and maybe in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, we'll be able, or I don't know, 2 months time, we'll be able to figure out how people work together, and we'll be able to perform much better later. Now, let's talk about the group facilitation compass. The group facilitation compass is actually a concept that I learned at MIT, which talks about the different roles that each of the member in the team should be able to perform. Right? The initiation, reciprocity, opposition, and metacognition. Now, a lot of us will be very familiar about initiation, reciprocity. Initiation is a person who thinks of new ideas and, I think this is a good idea. Let's do this, blah, blah, blah. Reciprocity is someone in the team says, oh yeah, I like that, let's do that. Right? They reciprocate. Right? And then that moves things forward. However, there are two other roles that the team should also be able, or should also have. The opposition, which is basically, no, I don't like that idea. No, that's gonna fail. No, this is a problem with that. No? Why? Because if everybody agrees, you'll not be able to come up with a much better idea. Yeah? Innovation only works if everybody thinks a bit differently. Right? If everybody thinks the same, there will be no innovation. Everybody just follows wherever things go. But and to break the common, or the common concept, you need to have an opposition. And fourthly would be the metacognition. This is again an important role that we rarely actually see, because metacognition is basically a role that observes how the team is performing. They will observe, is there an initiation in the team? Is there someone that reciprocates? Is there someone that opposes the idea? If there is none, then the metacognition should, raise their hand and say, hey, wait, we need someone to do the opposition. Hey, wait, we're lacking out of new ideas. Nobody's initiating new ideas. Right? So the metacognition will ensure that all these roles are actually being performed. Right? So it's a very, very interesting concept that we haven't really, thought about when we are forming the teams. So you can probably try it out when you go back to your teams and analyze, do we actually have these roles being performed? Maybe you can be the metacognition and tell someone in your team na, hey, you can you act as the oppositor, right? Think of why this idea will fail. Right? Because if you think of, why ideas will fail, that's the only time you'll be able to come up with a better idea. Okay? So that's a group facilitation compass for you. Now you form the team. Let's start about. We actually haven't talk about the actual project management yet. We've only talked about the concepts, the basic concepts of project management, how you're gonna hire the team. Now let's talk about planning the build. How do you actually plan and build software? So what's the very first step when we talk about the product plan? Well, it's a product roadmap. The product roadmap is basically a set of milestones where you define the different set of features, when they will be delivered, right? So that everyone will have a better picture of what the product will look like in the end. The product roadmap allows you to define your vision, right? So that allows you to be able to communicate with your team, with other team members, with your investors of what the product is all about and when can they expect certain features to be available, right? So the product roadmap is broken down into milestones, and milestones are broken down into sprints. So let's talk about how to break down a product roadmap into milestones and into sprints. A milestone is defined as a time frame where at the end of each milestones, there is a version of the software that will be available to the customer for use, be it public or end users, right? So for startup, the first milestone will most likely be the MVP, right? A version of the software that can be tested and tried out by the customer so that we can continue improving as we go along. Now, for each milestone, you'll then define certain sprints with certain use cases and certain features that will be delivered. And you probably would want to break down the features or use cases into tasks. The tasks are the tickets or a set of tasks that you actually assign to a developer, right? So imagine your entire product roadmap. You break it down into a milestone. You break it down to a sprint. Now, when you do the planning, because we do not and we probably cannot plan the entire roadmap down to per sprint level, definitely not on a per task level for the next 1 year. It's going to be very, very difficult, and that's not agile. You probably would want to define only milestones for the entire roadmap. Just make sure you have clear set of features that will be delivered for all the milestones in your product roadmap, and then you focus on the first milestone, right? So on the first milestone, you then start defining what are the sprints, what are the features that will be delivered on a sprint, what are the use cases that will be delivered per sprint, and what are the tasks that we're gonna assign to the developers, right? So when you break down the milestone into sprint, you break down into the first sprint, you break down that down into tasks. So usually what I do is for a milestone, we will identify how many sprints we need, right? What are the use cases for each sprint? And then you don't actually have to break it down on a task level for all the sprints. You break it down on a task level for the very first sprint, right? So when you break it down on a task per developer, you'll be able to give better estimates also. You'll be able to plan better. So as shown in this table, the estimation on a roadmap, on a milestone and sprint varies in terms of size, and at the same time, the accuracy of the estimate also changes. So you can see a roadmap is defined, it's composed of features, and it's estimated in months, and it's completed ideally within 8 months to a year, and your accuracy of estimate is probably going to be around 50%. If we talk of a milestone, we're talking about 2 to 3 months time frame, and you probably would want to estimate in terms of days, ideally, and your estimation should be around 75% accurate. And then when you go down to the sprint, you're estimating it by task, you're estimating it by hour, then your estimate should be above 90% accurate. Usually a sprint is about 2 to 3 weeks. No? So that's how you break down the roadmap into milestones, into sprints, into actually actionable tasks that are being performed by the developer. No? So that's the product roadmap. Let's move on to the next, which is milestone planning. So once you have your roadmap done, the very first thing that you need to do is to do milestone planning on your very first milestone. Milestone 1, planning. So let's talk about milestone planning. So for milestone planning, it's probably one of the most exciting journey that you'll get, because at the end of the milestone, you'll get a version that you'll be able to show to your customers, and customers will be able to use, right? So that's, there's actually a very concrete result in the end of the very first milestone. So how do you do milestone planning? The very first concept that you need, or the very first activity that you need to do when you do milestone planning, is actually design. And my practice is that you make sure that you have all the designs in place for that milestone before you actually start doing the development work, Now, sometimes the design may take about half of the entire milestone duration. But if you are able to nail down the designs, the screen properly, the rest of the sprint, the actual development will be so much faster. So that's one of the struggles of other startups who just start working on a sprint without having a clear vision of what should be delivered in that sprint. Right? You don't know what the screens will look like. We'll figure out the screens as we build it, as we go along. No? And then in the end, at the end of the sprint, when they delivered it, it doesn't look good, and worse, it doesn't work as the client expected. No? So it's important that you go through a design sprint where you'll be able to come up with different screen layout, different forms, different fields, what are the interactions with the user, and you show this to the end user. So it's essential that you do this activity first before you actually go through the development. Now your question is, hey Alan, I have developers. What will they be doing? They can be involved in the design sprint. In fact, they should be involved in the design sprint. The design sprint is not only for the creative designer, although of course that's the most important role during design would be a creative designer to come up with nice layout, but the developer can also contribute. They can identify what are the fields that will be shown, what are the different interactions in the screen, right? And they can also be involved in coordinating with the users. Eventually, now as you move on to the subsequent sprints, you will have the screens prepared already before the start of the development work. Right? So you'll be able to get a more efficient use of your developer time na. Now, I'll explain that a bit more in a subsequent slide. But for now, what I want to establish is that you make sure that before a sprint starts, there is already a clear set of tasks that the developers will be doing. What are the screens? What do they look like? Right? They can probably figure out how it will work in the back end. But if you can define the back end schema also, that will be so much better. The goal is to clear the road for the developer once they start working on the sprint, to make sure that the road is clear so that they can run 120 kilometers per hour. Right? Because if you start a sprint and then there's no screen layout, and the screen layout keeps on changing while you're coding, you'll end up with a much worse software. Why? Because every change will have impact to the quality of the software you're building. You're not only rewriting the software, you're also making the code more messy. Right? The developers will understand this. If I write a certain feature and you ask me to change this, I'm just gonna tweak a few bits and pieces here, but the original design might not be efficient anymore because there are certain changes that took effect. So ideally, you would want to define a complete set of screens and let them design it accordingly with few changes as much as possible, so that they can develop things much faster. Right? So start with the design sprint. Then you identify the product backlog. Then you go through the sprint planning. So for those who are familiar with sprint, this is a very common concept already. You go through the sprint, you do your daily stand-up meetings, and you do your sprint review and your backlog. But for planning, when you're doing the milestone planning, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, is to make sure that all the tasks are clear before you start with the actual development sprint. Now, another way of viewing the milestone planning is to look at it with multiple streams. So as you can see here, a milestone can have multiple streams. A design stream, development stream, performance stream, technical debt stream, or whatever task you need to work on. So there will be multiple streams, and this will allow you to visualize which stream should we work on first. So for example, if you are working on, say, registration page, before you start working on a registration sprint for development, you have to have the design task beforehand, the design sprint for registration beforehand, so that when you start working on your development for registration, you already have an approved set of screens that you will work on. No? So eventually, they will be running in parallel. No? So there will be inefficiency maybe at the start because your developers aren't that involved in the design, right? But at some point, your designer will be doing designs prior to the actual development sprint. No? So they that will just be sequential. And at the same time, if there are other tasks that needs to be done, for example, how do we manage bug fixes while we are undergoing an agile sprint, right? So if you view it as multiple streams, then you will have another stream for paying off of technical debt. You can have another sprint for performance tuning, right? And you can probably allocate certain number of hours, certain number of time for paying off technical debt, for performance improvement, along with the development stream. No? So viewing it with multiple streams will allow you to organize your thoughts as to what are the different tasks that needs to be done on a certain sprint. All right. Now, a couple of tips when you're doing planning, especially when you're doing sprint planning. No? So there's a task that we call as backlog grooming, task ticket grooming, where you'll be able to filter out the items on the backlog and remove maybe the ones that have been developed already. If you are into, if you've been doing agile for a while, you'll realize at some point, you'll have 800 tickets in your backlog already, and it's gonna be hard to manage. You need to spend time in actually grooming all those tickets, ticking off the tasks that were already done or tasks that are no longer needed, so that you can manage the backlog. Next is to check the team capacity. In our case, we have an Excel sheet where we'll be able to track how many hours should be allocated for this sprint, and then we make sure that the actual tickets or the estimates for the tickets assigned for that sprint is sufficient, minus the holidays and probably any scheduled leaves of the developers. That way, you'll get a more manageable and more predictable timeline. If there are any tasks that are longer than 2 days, I suggest you break it down further. Usually, if a task is estimated at 5 days, all right, that needs to be broken down maybe into 10 or 20 more tasks so that you'll get more accurate estimate. Sometimes when you estimate 5 days, it's most likely it's not gonna be that accurate, right? But if you break it down into subtask, into per different hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, eventually you'll get a more accurate estimate, and then you'll have higher chance of actually completing that as you expected. Look for acceptance criteria also. If you have a QA in the team, let the QA write acceptance criteria. What are the checks that I will be checking, when I do testing for this module, so that the developers can do the check beforehand and avoid back and forth. That the back and forth between the tester and the developer and the tester and the developer for certain bugs, that takes a lot of time. No? So ideally, you'd want to minimize that. What you'd want to happen is that the QA or the lead or someone writes the acceptance criteria. These are the conditions that this module need to satisfy. The developers make sure when they push their code, all these conditions have been accomplished. They're ready, and submit it to QA for testing. Everything passed. We all go home early, right? Now, one other thing that you need to understand is when you do sprint planning, you have to allocate time into it. That's one of the problems we had before when we were starting. No? We always estimate a task. We always estimate a sprint as because it's 2 weeks, no? So we're always assuming 80 hours. We have 80 hours of work available every sprint for 2 weeks for one person. That's not correct, because you'll have to consider the time you need for sprint planning. Usually that's half a day or sometimes even one whole day. No, so you're left with 72 hours, right? And then every day you spend 15 to 30 minutes of meeting. So times 8 days, so that's probably half a day. Now, the other type of planning is that if you are actually planning for a R&D task, no, say, Allan, our startup is based on research and development. We need to do R&D in order for us to deliver a solution. Now, you have to understand there are different types of R&D. No, the basic or the experimental research and the applied research. Now, if you are in experimental research, that means you are doing research with a known solution. You don't even know if that's gonna work. No, you can be like Moderna. You're doing research on mRNA, right? And you don't know if it's actually gonna give you a result or not. Ideally, those type of research are done in the academe or by very large companies like Google. Now, if you're a startup and you're doing those kind of research, consider yourself in an experimental mode. You're not really a startup yet until you found the solution. Or better yet, look for academic research that have already solved that. Maybe there's an existing solution already. Just to share with you the story of Moderna, the technology behind mRNA is actually been researched decades before the rollout of mRNA by Moderna. No? And this research were conducted in different universities by different professors, different PhDs, passed from one researcher to the other. To find the right formulation for mRNA to work and yet safe for human. Okay, it was not actually Moderna who developed mRNA. It was done in the academe, and Moderna took that patent. They probably purchased a patent and developed it into an actual vaccine, which is the same technology that Pfizer is using. So if you are looking into something like that, you might as well look into the academe and check for this research and figure out a way to commercialize this, right? So if you so that's a better way of doing your startup. Or if you are actually doing applied research, then you are gonna looking into technology that none in your team is actually familiar of, right? You're just doing a research on a certain machine learning technology that's actually been done by other teams in other country. You just need to localize it here in the Philippines. You need to do R&D because you are not familiar about a certain programming language. You're not familiar about a certain task. Then those are applied research. That's fine for startups. In fact, there's a lot of applied research for startups. No? Meaning, that there's a solution. The solution works. You just need to take time to study them. Now, usually for those type of work, they can still be estimated. Now, you can still put certain amount of time to do research. I guess based on past experience, certain technology, you can study that in 1 week or 2 weeks time. Then you can plot also a timeline for that. Okay, so that's how I would classify planning for research and development work. Now let's move on to the next part of product development, which is tracking the actual progress of the project. So we've already talked about how to plan for product roadmap, how to plan for the product milestone, and the sprints. Now let's talk about how do you actually track the task and make sure that they're actually getting done. So the very first role of the manager, or the very first function of a manager in tracking, is to clear the road. As I mentioned earlier, the project manager should make sure that any challenges or any issues, any blockers that anyone in the team is encountering is addressed in a timely manner. In fact, you'd want to clear everything already before they start running. No, but naturally it happens that while you are on your way, certain blockers come in. So say for example you're integrating with the payment gateway and you're not getting the response you're expected. You need to coordinate with the payment gateway provider, right? So the project manager should make sure that we're able to get the answers we need on time so that developers will be able to progress moving forward with that ticket. right? So that's most basic role of the manager when the things are rolling already. It's making sure that all the issues that the developers are facing are being addressed in a timely manner. Of course, you'd want to track their progress, and you do your daily stand-up meeting, right? So daily stand-up meeting, everyone gathers together, they report what they've done and what they plan to do and what are their blockers. And it's very basic concept of agile. But here's a pro tip, no? I would still insist that you able to track your task and your accomplishment by the hour, right? So I suggest you always ask your developers to log their hours before the stand up, and put their actual hours there, because that's gonna be useful at the end of the sprint. And the good thing is, when you're collecting the actual hours, is that your reason for delay, your cause of delay, is actually based on concrete data, based on the actual hours spent, and not because of what your developer just said. No? Maybe they'll say that their cat died and it got delayed. No? So this is actual, based on real data, so that you know what to address on the next sprint. No? So again, it's not hard to collect hours. It's all about developing the routine that everyone are able to report the hours that they spent working on a certain task. Once you get that thing done, it becomes seamless. It becomes a natural process already, where you report your hours. So try it out. That's gonna give you a lot of predictability in your project. Okay, another pro tip is to actually measure the quality. If you have predictable time frame already, if you have predictable timeline, you start looking into measuring the quality of your software, either by checking the number of bugs that are being reported, or by using automated tools that will check your code for code smells. You can look at Sonar Cube or lint checkers to assess the quality of your code. That can also help you go a long way if you have a more stable or better quality of code in your application. So assuming you've already completed your sprint, and what's the next thing to do? Two things: you do your sprint retrospective, and you do your build review, right? So I always enjoy doing build review, because that's the time where you'll be able to look at the actual system and comment on how the behavior of the system, and look for improvement also on the actual output. No? So build review is checking the actual task that's completed, the actual screens, the working system. The sprint retrospective talks about the processes. What has happened in the sprint, right? You completed 14 out of 16. What happened to the two tasks that were not completed? Why are they not completed? What could we do to avoid this? Again, you can go back to the people process tools to understand what you can improve on from the sprint retrospective, right? And there's a lot of very practical improvements that you can learn from if you do sprint retrospective properly. So now that you're able to track and close the sprint and finish the sprint and review, you can then move on to the next sprint and next sprint until you complete the set of milestone, right? And then you install that, you get that tested. Hooray, you're able to complete the project. Now, maybe in the very first few milestones, you'll be delayed, but with proper discipline, if you practice all this proper tracking and all the processes, you'll notice that your team will deliver more consistently. Their performance will continue to improve. Your results will be more predictable. And in fact, for me, what's more important is predictability. Not necessarily the speed, but predictability. If we're able to predict the actual timeline and the actual result, we'll be able to manage things much better. Right? Of course, now once you have predictability, then you go for optimization later on. But you need to achieve predictability first before you can actually optimize. Otherwise, it will be very hard to scale also. I hope that you've learned a lot from this session about project management for startups. And if you want to learn more, Please sign up and wait for my book. I'll be launching a book about project management with all these concepts and more details about what I've been talking about. You can pre-register already on this link, and and show support also. If you learned a lot, I'd appreciate if you pre-order a copy of your book already, which will be launched early next year, 2023. We're just finalizing some of the diagrams and the concepts, but there's gonna be a lot of to learn from this book. And yun, just hoping for your support, and thank you for spending time in this session.